The weather had been getting colder, and Farmer Grant knew a big storm was coming. He asked the brothers to help secure the house and barn before the storm hit. John immediately started planning what needed to be done, making sure to prepare for the worst. "Charlie, we need to work together. The storm will be here soon, and we need everything to be safe," John said. Charlie, however, didn't see the urgency. "I'll handle it. I'll get everything ready. You can take your time," he said, rushing around to do his part. John shook his head, but he knew Charlie could be stubborn. He started by checking the windows and doors to make sure they were secure. But Charlie was already up on the roof, hammering away at the shingles without any real plan. "Charlie, wait!" John called. But Charlie didn't listen. He kept working quickly, thinking he was helping. Before long, the wind picked up, and the first raindrops began to fall. The storm had arrived faster than they had expected, and the roof wasn't properly secured. As the rain began pouring down, Charlie scrambled to cover the roof. But by then, it was too late. Water began leaking into the barn. John ran inside to find the worst of the damage. "Charlie, this is what happens when we don't take time to do things right." Charlie, feeling guilty for rushing, quickly helped John fix the leak, but the barn had already suffered some damage. They spent hours working together to repair it before the storm worsened. When they were finally finished, the storm was raging outside. Charlie felt terrible about the mess he had caused, but was grateful that John was there to fix it. They sat together in the barn, both of them exhausted, but relieved it wasn't worse. Charlie finally spoke up. "I should have listened to you, John. I was in such a hurry to finish. I'm sorry." John smiled, though tired. "It's all right. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." The brothers were given another task the next day. They had to watch over the sheep and make sure they stayed safe. John gave Charlie clear instructions. "Keep an eye on the sheep and don't let them wander." Charlie, eager to do things his way, told John he could handle it. John, however, had learned not to trust Charlie's rush to finish. He stayed close by, watching Charlie as he tended to the sheep. While John was working nearby, Charlie became distracted. He noticed a group of birds flying overhead and decided to follow them for a few minutes. "The sheep are fine," Charlie thought to himself, not realizing the danger. While he was away, the sheep wandered off towards a dangerous cliff. John quickly saw what was happening and rushed to stop them. He managed to round them up just in time, leading them back to safety. Charlie, realizing what had almost happened, felt a deep shame. He ran over to John, his face red with guilt. "I'm sorry, John. I should have paid attention. John nodded, looking at his younger brother. It's all right, but you need to understand that your actions can affect others. You can't just rush through life. Sometimes it's important to stop and think. Charlie understood for the first time what his brother had been trying to teach him. From that day on, he began to listen more carefully and think before acting. From that day onward, Charlie started paying closer attention to what John was telling him. It wasn't easy for him to change overnight, but the more he listened, the more he understood the value of being careful. He was still the same impulsive Charlie, but he was learning to slow down and think before acting. One morning, Farmer Grant assigned them a new task: gathering the crops from the fields before the weather got worse. The fields were large, and there were a lot of vegetables to harvest. John already knew the best way to do it, but Charlie was determined to take a different approach. I'll do it my way, Charlie said confidently. I'll pick the fastest route, and we'll be done in no time. John raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He'd seen how this played out before. However, he also knew that this time, Charlie had been trying harder to learn from his mistakes. Charlie started by picking a few vegetables here and there, but instead of gathering them in an organized way, he started rushing through the rows, grabbing things carelessly and dropping others. It wasn't long before the crops were all over the ground, damaged and scattered. John watched for a moment before walking over to him. Charlie, you need to take it slow. Look at the mess you've made. We won't be able to use half of these vegetables now. Charlie looked at the pile of scattered crops, feeling frustrated and embarrassed. I was trying to get it done quickly. I didn't think it would get this bad. John sighed, but offered a hand. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it. Let's just pick them up and do it right this time. They spent the rest of the morning carefully picking the vegetables and placing them in baskets, working as a team. Slowly but surely, Charlie began to realize that working together and taking their time was far more effective than rushing. By the end of the day, they had gathered more crops than they had expected, and everything was intact. As the day ended, Charlie looked at John with a newfound respect. I get it now, John. I thought I could do it on my own, but I see why you're always so careful. John smiled. It's not about doing it alone, Charlie. It's about knowing when to ask for help and when to slow down. Charlie nodded. The lessons were starting to stick, and the bond between the two brothers seemed to grow stronger each day. As the days went by, Charlie continued to improve. He was still impulsive at times, but he had become more thoughtful, and he had learned to appreciate the value of taking his time. He was no longer rushing through tasks without thinking of the consequences. John noticed the change in him and felt proud of how far his younger brother had come. One afternoon, after they had finished a day's work, Farmer Grant called them into the house. The farmer smiled at both of them. "You two have been working harder than I've ever seen. The farm has never been better, and it's all because of your teamwork." Charlie beamed with pride. He knew that the change wasn't easy, but he had made it through. "Thanks, Farmer Grant. I've been trying to learn from John." John gave a small smile. "We've been working together. That's all that matters." Farmer Grant nodded, clearly pleased. "Well, as a reward for your hard work, I'm giving you both a little extra food for the winter. You've earned it." Charlie's face lit up. "That's great. Thanks, Farmer Grant." He turned to John, who simply nodded, his quiet pride in Charlie showing in his eyes. The brothers walked back to their small cottage, carrying the extra food. The village had started to feel more like home with each passing day. Charlie was beginning to realize that, though he wasn't perfect, he didn't need to rush through life. John had always been his guide, and now he was learning to be more like him, careful, patient, and thoughtful. That night, as they sat down to eat dinner, the two brothers shared a quiet moment. Charlie looked across the table at John, his brother and friend, and smiled. He had learned so much, not just about the farm, but about himself. The farm wasn't just a place to work. It was a place where they had grown together, where they had learned from each other, and where they had become a team. The days of rushing were behind Charlie. He had finally learned to stop, think, and take things one step at a time. And with John by his side, there was no task too big or small that they couldn't handle together. As the winter months came, the farm was stocked with plenty of food. The brothers continued to work side by side, making sure everything was in its place. They were no longer the reckless duo they had been at the start. Now, they were known as the most reliable workers in the village. Charlie, though still a little impulsive at times, had become a more careful and thoughtful person. John continued to guide him, and together they created a peaceful, happy life in the small farming village. And so, the brothers continued to live happily, working the land, caring for the animals, and taking pride in everything they did. Their bond grew stronger, and the farm flourished. The lessons they learned along the way, patience, teamwork, and thinking before acting, became the foundation of their success. And in the end, they realized that the most important thing was not just the work they did, but the care they took in doing it, and the respect they had for each other. They were no longer just brothers. They were partners in life.